Good morning. I'm glad to get together with you this morning for a few minutes. I appreciate your faithfulness to our church. So many of you just do so much, and I love what I get to do. And as the years go by, I love it more. And the other day, I talked about some of the things in this book, "The Enemies of Soul Winning." Dr. Jack Hyles wrote this book, and and it's just a list of things. And this is not just for pastors, but it's things that pastors should grasp. And the three things, I say this often, the three things that set our church and churches like ours apart from others is soul winning, our separation, and our belief of the scriptures, that we believe we have the word of God in our very hands. And but all those are under attack all the time. They've always been under attack, and they continue to be. And so, when I just want to mention a couple of the things when we look at the enemies of soul winning and things that the devil uses to try and attack soul winning. Again, how could anyone be against going out and telling people Jesus saves? How could it be? But you'll be amazed. There's preachers who they go out of their way to criticize soul winning churches, and they'll say, "Oh, you have easy believism, just so easy." Well, how hard is it to believe? If you the thief on the cross, I don't know how long Jesus witnessed to him, but there's not many words recorded in the cross between the thief and Jesus. But that guy was with the Lord. And the Ethiopian man with Philip in Acts chapter 8, how much time did he spend? He's explaining the book of Isaiah, began to preach unto him Jesus, and he sees some water, say, here's water, what doth hinder me be baptized? If thou believest, I believe Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God. And they went down both into the water. How hard is that? But we get our thinking off, and I'm not saying that Satan doesn't infiltrate every area. He infiltrates the liberals, he infiltrates the government, he infiltrates the conservatives. He's not just going to let good things happen. He's like a roaring lion walking about seeking whom he may devour. So sure, there's all kinds of there's corruption in any kind of a religion. There's corruption in the conservative or the liberal political world. And so, but the idea of being critical of soul winning, Paul said, "I rejoice that Christ is preached." He said, some people, they talk about Jesus hoping to add affliction to my bonds. But he said, you know what? I'm just glad the name Jesus is being talked about. But some enemies of soul winning, the idea of they call it lifestyle evangelism. And there are terms that come up in Christianity, new terms: purpose-driven church. And that's not something you hear about now, but that was the term for a long time. Lifestyle evangelism was a term. You don't need to go witness, just have a lifestyle, and people will see your life and they'll want what you have, and they'll come and say, "What do you have that I don't? I want what you have, and I want Jesus." And that's not biblical. They went forth and preached everywhere. They went and they did not. The idea of soul winners will be criticized because they butt into people's lives and leave people alone, let them choose what they want. Well, the New Testament disciples, they didn't get thrown in jail and have rocks thrown at them because they were mowing their lawn and washing their car so good that it made the neighbors mad. No, they were preaching Jesus, and they brought Jesus into the world. And the silversmith that made the statues of the goddess Diana, he said, our very job's at stake. These people getting so many people saved, they're not buying our statues anymore. It's all about money. And so lifestyle evangelism, that we don't talk about our faith, we just show it. Now, we should show it, and how we live should back up what we say. But to live a life of good and honorable behavior without telling people about Christ, that is wrong. I'm sure there are honorable and good living people of all stripes, and that doesn't mean they're all going to heaven. And so the other one is abandoning our Baptist heritage to forget who we are. How did we get here? What sets a Baptist apart? What sets a fundamental Baptist, one who goes back to their early roots? What sets us apart? And you go back to the 1700s to a man named Shubal Stern and others in that era. And some of them were thrown in jail, and the judge said of these two men that were in court, they said, you cannot pass them on the street without them jamming some scripture down your throat. And these are Anglicans. These are Church of England people, and that bothered them that these guys were saying, you must be born again, and the wages of sin is death. They were just soul winners. But if we forget who we are and where we came from, that's an enemy of soul winning. We'll lose soul winning. Another is just the basic criticism of soul winning. And there's just 144 pages of lessons, things to keep our church soul winning, things that the devil will throw in that will chill the fires and the excitement about witnessing. And the devil doesn't like soul. He doesn't like people getting saved. Yeah, I had a couple of thoughts today in Samuel. If you'd like to look at 2 Samuel chapter 1, I wanted to bring just a quick thought or two to you. Just that you can learn a lot about people by seeing how they treat other people. I think a young couple seriously dating and are engaged, but those considering engagement, I think they ought to sit around and look and talk. You ought to see people, the way they act, the way they talk, the way they treat their children, because it helps you think. A couple dating, how do you discuss child discipline? How do you discuss spending? And you don't know, but if you see, then it's in front of you and you can talk about it. Here's some man traipsing down the sidewalk at the park or at the mall among the stores, and he's 10 feet in front of his wife, and he's ignoring her. And then here's a couple sitting at a restaurant table, and they're not looking at each other. They're both looking at their phones. Those are things you ought to talk about. And a couple, it's a way to get to know each other. So when you hear someone talking about another, when you see how someone acts, for instance, when Billy Graham died, President Trump had Billy Graham's casket in the rotunda. And I don't know, I'm not the historian, but I don't know if there are any other preachers ever in that spot. And the way that President Trump treated Billy Graham with such respect, that said something about the man. That's what I'm talking about. When you watch how people treat another person, especially when it's out of their control. I'm your boss and you're nice to me. That means nothing because you want to keep your job. But when I'm dead and you're nice, or when I'm not present and you're nice, now we start finding out about what's inside you. And that's what we're looking at here in 2 Samuel. In the text, King Saul and Jonathan, his son, and 2 other boys had gone to battle, and they'd all died. Saul had been hit by an arrow, I think it was an arrow, and he was dying. And the enemy was coming, and he said to his armor bearer, slay me. I don't want the enemy to get me and to abuse me. And he wouldn't. And no, he's going to kill the king. How do you do that? And so Saul fell on his own sword, so the armor bearer fell on his sword and died. Well, and then Saul didn't die. He's been hit by an arrow. He falls on his own sword. He's bleeding all over. And this Amalekite guy comes by. The battle's pretty much scattered everywhere. And he sees Saul, and Saul says, slay me. And the guy said, I can see you're not going to live. I'll take your life. He kills him, takes his bracelet, like some royal thing or gold bracelet on his arm, takes the crown and runs to David far, far away and brings it to David. And so we find 2 people here. I'm just going to read a verse or 2 about this in 2 Samuel chapter 1. And it says, verse 2, it came to pass on the 3rd day, behold, a man came out of the camp from Saul with his clothes rent. And so from Saul, so he was an Amalekite, but he was with the Jewish people there, earth upon his head. So it was when he came to David, he fell to the earth and did obeisance. And David said, from whence comest thou? Excuse me. And he said, out of the camp of Israel am I come. And David said, how went the matter? And he goes on. And he said, the young man, in verse 6, the young man told him, said, I happened by chance upon Mount Gilboa. Behold, Saul leaned upon his spear, and lo, his chariot and horsemen followed hard after him. And I looked, and when he looked behind him, he saw me and called me and answered, here am I. And he said, who art thou? And I answered, I'm an Amalekite. And he said, stand, I pray thee, upon me and slay me, for anguish has come upon me. Now, he comes there. And so he goes straight to David, probably thinking he's going to get something good because Saul had been chasing David, trying to kill him. David had been avoiding Saul. David had been avoiding the fight. David said multiple times, I will not lift up my hand against God's anointed. I won't do it. I just won't do it. Well, then, so you see how this Amalekite guy treated Saul. He had no problem taking his life, had no problem taking the crown, taking the bracelet. Some, like you see our athletes wearing things in their arms or whatever. No telling. Well, then let's look at how David, and before we get to David, just think about this. Think about how the media and the liberals in Congress and in politics, how they treat Clarence Thomas. They treat the man like he's just, they're digging and searching for anything bad they can find about the guy to amplify it. Think about how they treated Justice Kavanaugh when he was going through the interrogation, literally. Look how they treated him. They dug back to his high school and college window of time somewhere, late high school, early college, whatever it was. And they're searching for something he did wrong that made, now, nobody had a problem with him before. But now, as a conservative, when he has a chance to get on the Supreme Court, man, they're grinding every little thing and making up things. And they, this gal that came out, I don't know all the details because I don't follow news that much, but some gal came out and accused of this and that. Well, it turned out later, maybe it wasn't all true, and maybe she was lying, and maybe she was mistaken or whatever. I have no idea. But I know this: no one apologized. No one in the newspapers with all the slander of Justice Kavanaugh, no one said, we were wrong. We reported some things that were in error, and we want to apologize to Justice. No. They don't do that. See, you can learn a lot about somebody, about what they're looking for. Anybody who pays attention to politics at all sees an agenda in there. There's something more than just safety. There's something more than just we want a fair person on the Supreme Court or whatever. And it'll work anyway. You take the religious circles. We'll get to David in a minute. If you look up anything about Dr. Jack Hyles, you won't find. You go to people who write things, people who put on YouTube or whatever. You won't find that he raised the money to run hundreds and hundreds of buses into the poorest parts of Chicago to bring people to church, to let those people hear the gospel. You won't hear that. You won't hear that he started a school just for the kids who rode his bus, because their poverty and their background educationally and their background ethnically made it very difficult for them to step into a normal Christian school, and their public schools were so bad. And so Brother Hyles started a school for the bus kids. So they had a godly place where they could pick up the educational pieces where they've been dropped. And maybe you're 8th grade, but you're only in 3rd grade. And teachers that are going to raise them up to level and help those kids have a chance for college. And no one writes about that. No one writes about the millions and millions of dollars spent on food and clothing and care for the poor. No, they're going to write about some slander and things that either had nothing to do with him, or things that couldn't be proven or someone said or whatever. And it's just a slander. And and he's been dead over 20 years. Why are people still? I can tell you one of the reasons that the power of the life of Dr. Jack Hyles is because after 20 years, people are still attacking him. He's dead. Why attack him? Well, because his truths live on. And his stand for righteousness and his stand for the Word of God and his stand for soul winning, his stand for the old-time religion, those things, they scare the religious world. I remember the day we were back at a conference at First Baptist Church, and Dr. Al started bringing people out, and it was dozens, 30, 40 people, I can't remember, but it was a lot of people, maybe more. And he said, these are all employees of our church or one of our schools. They're employees, paid people who work for the church or the college or one of the high schools, high school and the bus kids school, and then their elementary and high school, all these 4 different schools. He said, these are our employees who used to ride our buses. He had no problem reaching into minority areas to hire minorities. That didn't bother him. He had no problem reaching into poverty and helping someone get a start and putting them to work on his payroll. You see, you don't hear things like that. You don't hear about his rescue mission that he financed. He and the church financed this rescue mission so people on Skid Row and people that lived in the streets could have a bed and a meal. And they didn't just stay for a few days. I know missions that you can be in for 2 weeks and out for 2 weeks. You have to be in and out because they don't want you to get used to being in the mission. Well, Dr. Isles said they need a home. I'm going to give them one. His dad was a drunk, and he had a heart for kids who were raised in drunkards' homes. He had a heart for the drunkard. And then during the winter months, those guys that lived in the rescue mission, they would provide transportation. They'd go shovel the snow off the sidewalks and the driveways of the senior citizens in the church. Just great people, great people. The lady rode our bus out of North Chicago, poor, just a ghetto type lady, but a great lady. She rode a bus for a long time. Well, she ended up moving down to the neighborhood. Some of the bus workers helped her get moved down near the church because she was there anyway. She was there all the time. And she rode the bus and stayed there all day and rode the bus home at 10 o'clock at night. But once she moved there, she got to join the choir. And she was always in the choir. And then I find out one year I was back and I got to visit with her. She said, on Saturdays, I go with Mrs. Hiles soul winning in the rest home. And here, Mrs. Hiles, the queen of First Baptist Church, if you want to use that kind of a term, the first lady, her soul winning partner on Saturdays is a bus lady who had epilepsy and a lot of struggles, and she sang in the choir. And see, those are the stories you don't hear. Now, what you're looking at in 2 Samuel chapter 1 is how two different people reacted to the life and death of King Saul. So let's look at how David responded. So David, by the way, twice Saul tried to throw a javelin into David at the dinner table. Twice David avoided the javelin. And David had to flee the country, and David had to put his parents in another country under the care of a foreign king. And David lost his home. David lost his wife. She was taken from him. And just the horrible things Saul did to David. Lived in the wilderness, lived off the land, and just struggled. But David wouldn't fight back. So here's what happens. In chapter 1 of 2 Samuel, when David is lamenting in verse 17, he teaches in verse 18, he taught the children the use of the bow and arrow because he wanted them to remember King Saul. He was an archer. And then in verse 19, David says, the beauty of Israel is slain upon thy high places. How are the mighty fallen? That's David and Jonathan he's writing about. But he says, the beauty, the most beautiful, the one who personifies beauty in Israel, he died. How are the mighty fallen? He's mighty. He's a beautiful king. This is the guy who tried killing David. Go down a little bit further. Verse 22, from the blood of the slain, from the fat of the mighty, the bow of Jonathan turned not back, and the sword of Saul returned not back. They were warriors, and they're powerful. But look at verse 23 of chapter 1. Saul and Jonathan were lovely and pleasant in their lives. Lovely and pleasant. How do you just define someone like that? Verse 19, beauty and mighty. And verse 23, lovely and pleasant. Now, what you're looking at is two different people. One man took the death of a bad leader and hoped to get an advantage. The other one took the death of a bad leader and he pointed out as good. When you meet somebody who works at pointing out the weaknesses of another, by the way, if someone looked close enough at me, they'd find plenty of weaknesses. If someone looked closely at you, I'm guessing they'd find the same. Proverbs talks about love covers shame. We don't amplify shame. Now, if something's obviously, you don't even need to say it, but if something's legally wrong or someone's robbing the boss or the bank or whatever, yeah, you need to tell people. But, somebody's got some things in their life that aren't quite right. We don't need to talk about it. We don't need to tell somebody that maybe they lost their marriage or maybe their child got in trouble or maybe they'd been off their liquor and drugs and now they're back on it. We don't need to amplify that. These are real people and they matter. I remember this sermon, one of the staff men's wife, her daddy died and he'd been saved in the church and he and he came to First Baptist in Hammond, and the guy had never beat the bottle. He got saved, came to church, loved the preaching, loved the ministry, and loved the pastor and everybody, and his daughter and son-in-law were on staff there at the church. But he never beat that liquor. And Dr. Howe's sermon was kind of a 8 out of 10 isn't bad. He said he was a good father, and he was good at this, and he's a good employee, and he's good at this. He's a good church member. Oh, he loved his pastor. He's good at that. He said, I think 90% is a pretty good passing grade. And I think 80% is a passing grade in most schools. And, he didn't, and I guess, I didn't know, but I guess a lot of people knew he had a problem with liquor. But he didn't make the liquor a big deal. He lifted up the man and understood, yes, he had a weakness. He had an area of sin, but he did so good in these. You see, greatness is not your ability to destroy. Greatness is your ability to love and to lift up. And David was called a man after God's own heart. And the heart, a godly heart, is a heart that seeks to lift people up. As best, I don't think David should lie about Saul, but there's some good in Saul, he could say. There are some things in Saul's life that he could use and lift him up. And look, why are people still trying to destroy Thomas Jefferson and George Washington? These guys gave their lives to birth this country. And there are people who intellectually and morally could not hold a candle next to these people. And yet they'll write books and slander these men and accuse these men. I think, you know what, that just reveals a real dark inside, just a sinfulness inside and an evil inside. And over the years in our church, there's been a few divorces, not many, but there's been a few. There's been a few people who've gone back on drugs. So that's humanity. Do I need to stand in the pulpit and talk about somebody? Do I need to make someone feel worse because they lost a marriage? And the hardest day is just to walk in the church doors by yourself when your spouse is gone and you usually came in together. It's so hard to even get in the door of the church. They don't need anybody to make fun of them or look down on them or talk about how horrible their husband or wife was. They need to be loved. Over in Isaiah, he says, the Lord hath given me the tongue of the wise, that I know how to speak a word in season to him that is weary. Godliness. David revealed godliness when his greatest enemy died. He said, he was lovely and he was pleasant. He's the beauty of Israel. He's a mighty man. And David lifted him up. And he said, I want all the young people to be taught the use of the bow so they remember King Saul. Now, that is great Christianity.